So we will be starting, and we're already almost 80 people. So thank you everyone for joining and for joining from everywhere in the world. So we really welcome you all today. And today's webinar will be about in the newsroom writing caption for photo and videos. So I will briefly introduce some rules for this online meeting, and then I will give the floor to Jen. So of the rule for the meeting, so as we are many people, we will please ask you to keep muted, and so to not disturb with other sounds the speaker. And so it's the microphone on the left. And so today we're going to have a presentation on in the newsroom writing caption for photos and video. I will introduce a bit the subject. And if you have any question or request, technical request during the webinar, please write on chat. And if you have also any question on the presentation, you can keep them on the chat, and then we will review them at the end of the presentation and try to answer them. If you would like to also receive a diploma for this webinar, please write on chat, and it's better if you do it privately, so you don't disturb other messages and other questions. So write as diploma your name and your email address to Gosha or to me, Florian, and we will collect all the requests and send you after all the diplomas. And then we'll ask you a few questions about how to improve those webinars. And it would also be recorded, and it will be then uploaded on our website and our YouTube channel. And we will also invite you in other webinars that we are running right now. On the 5th of May about fostering civic participation for agriculture education, and 6th of May also with James about mobile journalism. We'll have more information about that. So So today's webinar, we are the pleasure to welcome James O'Hagan, who is a features reporter in Euronews Dubai bureau, and he's also closely involved in the launch of Good Morning Europe, but maybe we'll talk a bit more about that. And he produces a wide range of magazine content and reports, and a great host of topics, including business, news, gastronomy, text, summit, and adventures program. And today we'll be more talking about how to write caption for photos and videos, and including how to write good script and how to catch the audience. But I will now give the floor to James. And if you have any questions, please write on chat, and feel free to use the chat whenever you want. And thank you all, enjoyed the webinar, and we're almost 100, so really welcome, happy to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florian, and welcome to you all. I'm very honored to have been asked to do this webinar, and especially to have so many people from such a spread across the globe. This is my first ever webinar, so I'm actually more nervous about this than I probably would be if we were going live onto Euronews, because I'm more used to that. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat, so if there's any clarification or if you need me to repeat anything, I'll try to keep on top of that. So basically what I've done is just I've racked my brains to think of over the past 4 or 5 years working as a journalist, what I've picked up that I wish someone had told me when I was starting out. So Florian already introduced me briefly. I'll give you a little bit more information before we get into the main body of the webinar. So I started out, I actually studied English literature and theatre. So I didn't have an academic background in journalism, but I suppose it was kind of storytelling. It was always, my interest was always in storytelling. I then went into political science. So I studied political science for a master's, which brought me to this passion for factual storytelling. I then started to work, first of all, for a documentary production company that was making hour-long and 90-minute-long documentaries. And my role was archive researcher. So that's the person who finds all the old footage, all the old video material to illustrate the documentary and to help bring it to life. I then moved to France, and that's when I started working for Euronews almost 5 years ago now. And what was unique about working for Euronews is that it's in broadcast in 12 languages. So it was a great place to kind of to learn about different cultures, and it was a great system that they had, because the way it worked when I started was that each news story would be presented to a team of 13 people. Those 13 people would each work for a different language, some of them probably in your languages. I noticed some people from Greece, we have a Greek language service, including, there's also Arabic, Persian, Russian, Italian, German, 13 different languages. And so the way it worked to begin with was that a video would be cut on any topic, news topic, usually between 1 and 2 minutes. That video and those images, it was then our job to write a script in our language to fit those images. And what was great about it was that, you know, for example, if there was a story that was based in, at the time, it was Syria, the Syrian war was obviously it's ongoing, but at the time that was hitting the headlines every day. And we would quite often have a Syrian person on the team, so we could, you know, get more information from them about a particular story, and really enhance our own knowledge of stories from different corners of the world. From there, then went into live news production, which we'll probably talk a bit more about later, which is basically, if you watch a live news program, be it CNN, BBC, Euronews, and you have a presenter live on air who's reading from an auto cue, the role of the live news producer is to basically write what the presenter will be saying, and also organize the interviews remotely, much like what we're doing now, but there's a little bit more complexity to it. But for example, a live reporter on the field, the producer would make sure that the reporter knew when they were going to be live, what questions they were going to be asked, if they had a guest or not, all this kind of logistical stuff. But my hope had always been to become a reporter on the field, because, you know, it's kind of seen as the more exciting role within a newsroom, is to be the reporter on the field, because you are the intermediary between the people, the story, and your audience. You're not taking a story that someone else has filmed or someone else has reported about and reformatting it for your purposes. You are the one bringing the story to your audience. So it allows you to have it allows for a lot of originality. And so about 2 years ago, I became a reporter. And as Florian mentioned, there's no particular specialization. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's food, adventures. But my favorite subject to report on is ecology and environmental issues, which is why I'm so pleased to hopefully offer you some useful tips in your work. So I think we'll start by, I'll just explain what I'm going to go through in this webinar. I don't use PowerPoint. I probably should, but I don't. So I think I'll just speak, and then every so often I'll share the screen with you and show you some images. So to begin with, we'll start with still photographs, and we'll look at some news websites and some examples of what were seen as the best news photography, some of the best news photography from 2019. And we'll look at the way that they have approached writing the captions for that. Then I'll go on to talk about some different types of reporting. So as I mentioned briefly there about the newsroom, so different ways to report and how the skills change for each setting, but how the basics of writing to images remains the same. That is the same in pretty much all audiovisual medium. So if you're a print journalist, obviously this isn't necessarily within your realm. Then I'll go on and talk a little bit about script writing. Again, my experience is television, so it will be mainly what I've learned in that sector. And then I'll show you an example of a report I did recently with an environmental kind of angle, and I'll go through some of the methodology that you'll find on the young reporters for the environment website, which is really good. It's a really good methodology. And actually, having not even seen it, I kind of followed it myself. So to begin then, about photographs. I think this is quite, I found this quote yesterday and I thought it's quite valid. It said, "The world may move faster and the images it produces faster still, but what remains in the mind is the single frame." So this idea that we live in a world where we see more and more images than probably ever before, because everyone has a camera phone, whether you're on social media, whether you're more conventional media like television, there's more and more images that are kind of bombarding our consciousness every day.
James, you need to share your screen if you want to see us the photos.
Yes, I will. I'm about to show you some photos. I'm just introducing it before I show it. So here are some photographs that each year big agencies like Reuters and AP, they will have a selection of photos that you might have seen, which they say are the best photos of the year. So I'm just going to share my screen and show you some of those. Where do we see? So for example, this is Reuters. Reuters is a big agency most large news channels would use for their content. And you'll probably recognize some of these images from 2019. Sorry, just go back to this. You know, they say that an image speaks 1,000 words. That's almost become a cliche, that expression. And I think what's interesting about some of these images is that they start to take on a meaning that's much larger than themselves. One, for example, which is it's really quite devastating, is the famous image of the child who drowned off the shores of Greece during the migrant crisis. And that became such an emblematic photograph that it almost came to represent that entire story. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, said that having seen that photo, it was one of the things that made her decide to allow 1 million refugees into Germany. And this from 2019 is a kind of a similar example, a really tragic, terrible image, which shows, we'll read the caption first of all. It says, "The body of Salvadoran migrant Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez and his daughter Valeria lie in the Rio Bravo River in Matamoros, Tamaulipas in Mexico." And this was another similar photograph for 2019, which really, I think it captured the hearts and minds of many people across the world, and focused their attention on this issue that had hitherto not been ignored, but it wasn't really, it had stopped hitting the headlines because there was a caravan, what they call a caravan, hundreds and even thousands, I think, of migrants coming from Central America and making their way up to try and cross the border. And the thing about headlines is that once audiences have heard the same headline 2 or 3 times, journalists tend to move on to another story, even if that story is ongoing. But this image really brought that story back to the forefront of everyone's minds because of the power of it, the tragedy of it. So let's look at some of those images, not necessarily all sad images and not necessarily all tragic, but let's just have a look at them and how Reuters have approached writing the captions to them. Reuters is usually a good example for this because they keep it simple. Some websites have a tendency to overwrite, which is something we'll talk more about later. The image, you only need enough context to know basically when this happened, where it happened, and enough context for your mind to fill in the blanks by looking at the image itself. So they have just told us the name of the 2 people, where it happened, and the date. And really, I think that's all that you really need when you know the context of the story. If we look at another one here, now without reading the caption, you don't really have any idea what's going on here. You know, it's quite an engaging image. It might be interesting to look at. I personally would have no idea what's going on here unless they had given me enough information to understand more. reading it, it says, a protester walks in front of demolished metal fencing during a demonstration by the Yellow Vest movement in Paris, France. Okay, so the fact that it says Yellow Vest movement, I automatically understand the broader context of that story, which is these ongoing protests which have been happening, Florian will tell you, over the last several months in France. Move on to some more environmental photos now, which I had found before. Let me just see where they are. I can't see my tab. 1 second, bear with me. Hold on. That's time. So here is a selection of photos from The Guardian, and these all have an environmental angle to them. Now, The Guardian, unlike Reuters, I think, has a tendency to overwrite their captions. But you tell me what you think. Well, you can't. Maybe after, during the question section. So, now. Right. So, if we look at this image, for example, now, with one image, there are some. I'm just going to move this so I can see it. Wait, I'm going to minimize that. Sorry, I'm not used to these webinars. Right, so this image. Again, without looking at the caption, a very arresting image, really dramatic, you know, vivid colors. We see someone struggling. You would understand that that is an image about flooding. You would understand that that's really about all you would understand without the caption. Then here we've got the caption. They say, a huge wave lashes at a shanty, throwing a fisherman out of his home in Bandra, Mumbai, India. He is pulled by the strong currents, but was rescued by fellow fishermen before the sea could swallow him. Mumbai is at risk of coastal flooding, a fallout of climate change. The city's land and sea temperatures have been rising, causing a corresponding impact on the sea level. So, with that image, there's several angles that you could choose to highlight. You know, this image could be about flooding, yes, of course. It could be about overcrowding. It's a shanty town. It could be about overpopulation. But what ties all of these issues together, and undoubtedly the root cause of them all, is climate change. So with this caption, personally, if I were to write it, I would have put climate change at the top of that. Climate change would have been the first thing that I mentioned. And as a result of climate change, all of these other issues, including flooding, overpopulation, poverty, people in these overpopulated, impoverished areas are going to suffer even further and even more acutely as a result of these extreme weather events, which are caused by climate change. The way they've done it is kind of backwards for me. They start by explaining what you can already see, which is a wave. They tell you where it is. They tell you what happened to the subject. So this man that we see being sort of dragged down the street by the waves, and then they mention climate change. For me, it's kind of upside down. It could be better written, and it's a little bit long. Let's take a look at another one. Changing environments prize. Fallen trees lie on a beach as the waves from the Funafuti lagoon in Tuvalu lap around them. Land erosion has always been a problem for the South Pacific country, intensifying as sea levels rise. Rising seas are on the verge of completely submerging the tiny archipelago's islands. So again, a strong image, an aerial image. Without that caption, you wouldn't necessarily understand that there was a problem there. The uneducated viewer looking at that, even myself, if I didn't know what that was portraying, to me that just looks like a nice picture of a beach. Maybe obviously there's been a problem. Some of the trees have fallen down, but it doesn't look quite as disastrous as what it is. So that one, the caption is quite important. Pollution, again, I mean that image speaks for itself. As long as you know that's the location and the time, I think it's quite obvious that photo depicts pollution. I'll look at some more here, and then we'll move on. So this is Kenya. I think we've got some people from Kenya here. Hello to you. So again, whether this was Kenya or anywhere else in the world, that picture speaks volumes in and of itself. There's a child clearly thirsty who's who's forced to drink water from the ground in what looks like terribly dirty, muddy water. It could be anywhere suffering from drought. It could symbolize or come to represent any area where the population is suffering from drought. But let's see what the caption says. Water, equality and sustainability prize. This one won. A young boy drinks dirty water due to lack of water points in the area caused by deforestation. Lack of clean water greatly increases the risk of diarrheal diseases such as cholera, typhoid, fever, and dysentery, and other waterborne tropical diseases. So for me, that caption is pretty well written in the sense that it explains the broader issue at the top of the caption. So we see that it's deforestation that has caused this situation. I wouldn't have known that that was deforestation. It could have just been drought as a result of unprecedented lack of rainfall or something else. But in this case, they specify that it's as a direct result of deforestation. I'm not sure where exactly in Kenya that is. So what's useful about that is oftentimes you'll see that it's the human cost of something. It's the impact on a person, oftentimes even a single person, that really brings home a message to people. So you could talk about deforestation. You could even maybe show drone images of an area that's been where the forest has been taken away. For most people, that will have an impact on them, but not as much as if they can empathize with another person and think to themselves, look at the situation that that person has been put in as a result of deforestation. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now for a moment, and I'm going to go back to my plan. So considering all the images that you see in a year, I think it's interesting to think about which have stuck in your head and why. So for me, that image that I showed you of the father and the daughter who drowned, that when I thought about the pictures from 2019 that had an impact on me, that stayed with me, that one was really at the forefront of what I was thinking. And why was it? Why was it there in my mind? Of all the pictures that I would have seen, all the videos that I would have even shot, why was that one there? And I mean, I don't think there's any one answer. It's that it's striking, it's tragic, and it speaks to something much larger than itself. So that image represents it could represent the entire migrant crisis in America, in Europe. It speaks of a zeitgeist or an air of the time. And quite simplistically, it encapsulates something more complex. So if you have time to think about that, which images kind of you think stayed with you and why, and how you would do them justice by writing a caption that informs your audience just enough so that they can take that image and fill in the blanks with it, rather than necessarily with your words. So this, our final point on this is that it's important to, if you're writing, for example, let's say you're writing a photographic essay. So an article that's mainly consists of photographs. It's something that we all have, most people have the means to do. You need a mobile phone with a camera and a word processor, and anyone can really do this, in their own backyard. It's important that when you do that, I think that you leave the audience with a sense of agency. So an idea that if you present them with something terrible that's happening, like deforestation, climate change, these existential, huge issues that are impacting the entire world, that at the end of reading your article, they don't feel powerless. They don't feel like there's nothing they can do about it. Because when people are bombarded with this with these issues, and they feel like there's nothing that they can do about it on their level, they tend to switch off. It creates inertia. They become apathetic to the issue that you're trying to mobilize them towards. So I would say the 3 points to take from that about caption writing are, number one, don't overwrite. And this is a rule that will become important later for when you're writing scripts for television reports. Overwriting is the number one mistake that people make as journalists. I did it as well. You think the more you write, the better it's going to be. No, pare it down. It's okay to write a caption that's quite long, you know, where you're getting all the information you could possibly want to say about it, and then take some time to just shave it down, pare it down, until it's just the basic information that the person needs, the context. So where is it, when was it, and maybe one line of context. For example, you know, this was after a string of protests in France known as the Yellow Vest movement, and leave it there. If the person wants to know more, they can then research it, or they can maybe click on a link and find an article and continue their own research. But in this type of writing, the word is not the star of the show, the photograph is. So don't forget that. So we're now going to go on to talk a little bit about reporting in different media. So again, the best way to produce a report will depend on the subject. So for example, you know, if you were going to write a report about Carnival in Rio de Janeiro, because that visually, that subject is visual, there's music, there's dancing, there's colors, that lends itself very well to television because it's kind of an audiovisual subject. You wouldn't want to treat something like Carnival in Rio necessarily as a web article with no photographs, because you could, but it would be a big challenge, and the reader would probably want to see and hear what was going on in that particular subject. So the way you decide which medium you choose for your story will depend on the story itself, and whether that's in print, video, radio, whatever it is. If you're working in a visual field, this idea that we're going to try and look at of writing 2 images is going to be crucial anyway. So a good place to start, whether you want to be in television or whether you want to be a print journalist, whatever you want to do, I think a good place to start, and certainly for me it was writing an article with photographs like we just saw, but telling a story. For example, it's like a storyboard, we would call it in a news organization. But imagine that your story has, let's say, 5 points, and you have to tell that story using 5 photographs and 5 paragraphs. Try to do that, whether it's going to become a video or not. Try to do it like that, because it's a great way to hone your skills, not just at writing, but also at telling the story with the pictures as photographs. And again, anyone can do this. You just need a mobile phone. I could go out and tell you a story about my garden, although it's raining, so I probably won't. And then the interesting thing about that as a starting point for whatever medium you choose is that if you write a photographic kind of essay, it can then form the basis for anything else that you want. That piece of work could be your research to then go on and make a video report, because you know what you want to film and you know the structure that you want for your script in your head already. It might be the starting point for a debate that you could host, you know, or a podcast, you know, where you choose some guests to come on, and your photographic essay is the starting point for this discussion. So there's all kinds of ways that you can use it as stimulus for other types of work. And I'm going to show you now a recent report that I did, and I chose it because it has an environmental angle. And after you watch it, so I'll share the link now in the chat, and I'll just give you 4 or 5 minutes to watch it. Hope you like it. And then what I'll do is I'll just go through the methodology that you find on the Young Reporters for the Environment website and just explain how I kind of went about it. It really is a great methodology. I don't know who wrote that, but it's kind of helped me actually, because I had never thought of it that way. And it's a nice simplified process that you can just follow. So I'm now going to copy this into the link. Very difficult to make a good photo. Yes. I'm going to look at these messages now while you're watching this. While you're watching this video. So if you go into the chat section, you'll see a link to the website. I'll just leave you now. I'm going to read through your comments while you watch that, and I'll pick you back up in about 5 minutes. So at about 2:35, I'll pick you up.
Didn't receive it yet in the chat.
Oh, wait a second. Everyone.
Yeah, to everyone.
You got it? All right, so I'll come back in 5 minutes, and in the meantime, I'm going to read what you said. Okay, I'm going to stop the video. Right. So I presume most of you have probably watched that now. If not, I want to address one point which was brought up by Alexanders and Vitalis, in which they said they're talking about misleading photographs. So propaganda. This isn't something that I really covered because I imagined all you guys aren't in this business to be making propaganda anyway, but it does raise an important point, which I'd just like to show you. So I found this photo and I was thinking it's important that I mention this and I didn't think of it. So misleading, using an image to mislead. So I'm just going to share the screen again and I'm going to show you this. Now, when I saw this image, I was completely misled. So if you don't look at the caption for a second, to me that was, look at this guy, you know, look at these poachers. They're killing a rhino. But actually, when you read the caption, it's that the rhino is being dehorned in order to protect it from being poached. Sorry? Can you see that? So it says that the rhino is actually being dehorned. So it kind of shows the importance of sometimes offering context, because otherwise you can totally misinterpret an image, and it can be used deliberately to mislead your audience. So going back now to, I can't figure out how to use this. We'll see. Meeting controls. Oh no, there we are. So going back now to, I can't stop share. There we go. Can you hear me okay? So now going back to that report that I got you to watch, I'll just talk you through a little bit of the methodology that I used to make that. So I hope you enjoyed it. It's just an example, the most recent example of something that I made that had an environmental angle. I'm not saying it's the ultimate report or anything. It's just the experience that I personally have in reporting from the field with an environmental angle. So to run through the kind of, how do you go about making a report like that? Using the methodology that's available on the website, I'll sort of explain the process for that particular piece. So the step one was investigate. So I was based in a desert environment, which was in the Middle East, in Dubai. It's a country that's known really for not being particularly sustainable in its approach to many things, particularly, you know, living in a desert, air conditioning, things like that, and also its food supply. Is really, a lot of their food is flown in from other countries. A lot of their water supply is also flown in, so it's really not a very sustainable place. And I wanted to see, was anything being done about that? Was there any projects that aimed to make that city and that country both more food secure and sort of address the carbon footprint issue that it has? And I found that there were many. So when I started the research, I was looking at farming, and I'm particularly interested in new technologies. So one of those that came up was vertical farms, which are, I don't know how much you know about those. Vertical farms are basically, it's like a laboratory in which you can grow huge amounts of produce, huge amounts of vegetables using a fraction, a really tiny fraction of the amount of water that a conventional farm would use. And it's supposedly better than organic because there are no pesticides, herbicides, fungicides used, because it's a controlled environment. And the example they gave me is with one drop, literally a droplet of water, compared to a gallon, so 5-6 liters. That's how much water they save on conventional farming, because no water is wasted to evaporation, etc. So I looked at vertical farms, and then I even met someone. The biggest vertical farm in the world was going to be built there, and I met the CEO of a company called Crop One, who were going to build that. And the more I researched it, the more I realized that I didn't want to cover that because it was for profit. So these companies weren't doing this because it was environmentally a good idea. They were doing it because they wanted to make money. So I thought it'd be better to try and find something that was a not-for-profit. I didn't want to give a company that was out to make money free airtime. So I kept looking. And then I found that there was a group called ICPA, the International Centre for Biosaline Agriculture. And I knew from looking at the website straight away that I wanted to know more about them, and that I thought, yes, I might have found a good fit for this particular program. So I knew that it was not for profit, and that it was working not just in this wealthy country, the UAE, but it was taking its research and bringing it to other areas that it was needed free of charge. So so what was the next step? Well, once you've found the subject or one of the subjects that you want to include, you just have to get in touch with them, because oftentimes a website will make a company or a group look fantastic, look amazing, and then when you actually go and meet them, it's not really what they're pretending it is, and it's much less impressive in real life. So I called them up, I went to see them, I looked around their facilities, and it became clear very, very quickly from speaking to them that this was the real deal, that it was science-led, it wasn't about profit, and that the work they were doing was actually having an impact. So what was useful about this one, when we come to the next section in the methodology, is the research. So because they're all scientists and they've been working on this issue for 20 plus years, they had all the reliable data that I could ever ask for, and it was all very much scientific and detailed, and so any questions I had, it was all there for me. So that saved me really an entire step, where in your methodology it says conduct original research, do surveys and questionnaires and things like that. That was kind of already done for me. But an important point, you still need to check. It's not because someone says I'm a scientist and here's some data that you can just believe it and publish it. You do still have to do some of your own research to make sure that the information you're being given and the data you're being given is correct and is true. And in this case, it was. So the next step, it says here, cover relevant historic, economic, social, political implications and possible consequences of the issue. So in this case, it was again quite easy, because this group was set up 20 years ago to look at how the UAE and the Gulf, so this desert region, could potentially grow food. But since then, it's become even more relevant, because, as it says in the report, other regions are, because of climate change, are now finding themselves becoming more and more like that. They're becoming either arid or semi-arid. So the work that they had already begun to do in terms of researching the most resilient crops, finding out which crops could grow in salty soil or even be watered with salt water, and that now has become even more important in the global context that we live in 20 years on. So today. So that was the first stage. That was all really like a nice fit to that particular story. Then research solutions. So again, that's exactly what they're doing at this place. The whole purpose of ICPA was to find solutions that poor farmers in marginal areas could use themselves. So not something really high tech, really expensive, that's going to be completely inaccessible to a farmer working in Morocco, near the Sahel. Something that he or she could actually implement and use on their farms at their scale. So how do you go about approaching this report? So ICPA's one group. I've got a 4-minute report to do. You want to begin by introducing the issue in a global kind of context, as you'll have seen that I did there. I started talking about climate change globally. At the time that report came out, it was the same time that Australia was having the terrible wildfires, the unprecedented wildfires, and the images from that were coming in were really quite shocking and really apocalyptic. Shots with the skies completely blood red, and there was like silhouettes of animals trying to get away and all sorts of things. So I thought we'll introduce the topic globally, and then we'll focus in on the region. So by speaking to a policymaker, so that was you saw the Minister for Food Security. So she's the first minister in the world for food security. And when I went to see her, I didn't mention ICPA, I didn't mention anything. I just talked to her about her role, and she actually said the best example I can think of in the region for this topic is ICBA. So I knew my research was probably good. So she spoke generally about food security, and then she suggested that I had already filmed at ICBA, but she suggested that I speak to them. So then from that global perspective, a big name, somebody who's in charge of policy making, then you focus in on the solution. Again, that comes back to this idea that you don't want the audience to think, oh, what can I do about this? This is awful. Food security, people's livelihoods are at risk. People are, if they're overwhelmed with this sense that everything's terrible and there's nothing they can do, then they switch off. So this is the problem. Here's one solution, and it's only one case study, one solution, one group that I can show you. So then that's your report then, Step 3 report. So this is where you go, interview people, gather all your data, film everything, and decide so in my case, I knew it was going to be a television report, and I knew Step 4 dissemination, where it would be disseminated to. So for me, that's a little bit easier. But in your case, it's the same. It would be the same process. You might have gone there and decided that for a local newspaper, you wanted to write a photographic essay, or you wanted to write a simple web article. That also would have worked. It's just not the medium that I was working in. So now I'd like to speak to you about some of that. Just get into some of the details about that. So,
James, I can just intervene 1 second. The time is running really fast, and we already have lots of questions and chat. So if we can keep a bit of time,
okay,
it would be perfect because we have
questions. Okay. So I've over-prepared here a little bit. I've got a lot more to tell you. I just want to finish by giving you 3 little pieces of information about scripting, and then I'll take questions straight away. So in the report, you'll see that there was a piece to camera. That's when the journalist speaks directly to the camera. That is important. It's known as the top line in print. So the first thing that the audience sees or the reader reads is supposed to give you a concise summation or summary of what this article is about and the most important information in it. So that can be done if you're a television reporter using a piece to camera. That's where the journalist will pre-write what they're going to say, and you'll see in that one I explain where we are, and it's a drone and it goes up and shows you the facility. If you don't want to do that, you can also use a VO or a voiceover. Oftentimes it's nice to use a voiceover to link your script together. So once you've interviewed all your interviewees, you have transcribed all of your material, you've chosen the parts that you're going to use in your report. The voiceover is like the thread that takes you through your script, that seamlessly drives the viewer's attention through your story. I wanted to talk to you more about this, but I think we're sort of running out of time and we have questions. So I'll maybe cover that. Do you know what? I'll cover this last little bit that I wanted to in the next webinar, if you want to come back. If you haven't all left, I haven't checked. Oh, there we go. Right. Okay. Yeah, so I'll take questions now. Should I just read them from the message?
Yes, I think, or if you want me also, there is one question from Francesca. It sounds like the type of journalism you do, it's what is called constructive journalism, where you would show more the positive outcome of an event than the negative message, very often being the key message of everyday's news. What do you think about this constructive approach of making journalism?
So I think it depends on the subject. So if you're working in a newsroom, part of your job is, for example, to hold politicians to account. So let's say there was a scandal, something happened, a big scandal in your country, a politician stole money or something. In that case, it's not really possible to use constructive journalism, because you need to get that person and get them to answer for what they've done. And your audience has a right to know what's going on. And your job is really, it's not to paint a pretty picture, it's to tell the truth and to elicit the truth from someone who doesn't want to tell it to you. So in that case, you can't really be constructive. But I was lucky, because making these reports, I can approach that story whatever way I want. And if it's a story particularly about the environment or about something that a solution exists to, something that has a solution, then I think this constructive journalism approach works much, much better. For the reasons that I stated, people don't want to just hear problems. They want to hear solutions. So if you can present them with solutions that exist and they feel empowered, then I think you should definitely try to do that. Is there any place for subjectivity, or all news must be objectively conveyed? That's a good question. There's a place for subjectivity, and that's in op-eds, really. Some people aren't really journalists. They consider themselves more like commentators, and they'll be famous for their views on things, and they will write what are called op-eds or opinion pieces. And in an op-ed, you can say whatever you want. It's just your opinion. I'm not a famous thinker or a famous commentator, so I would always try to keep my opinion out of it as much as possible, and because it's not my role to tell you what to think or to tell you what I think. I just want to tell you the facts and show you possible solutions. The only time when you've got a little bit of room for that when you're just a normal journalist like me is what's called the payoff, which is the last line of your report, where it might be, you say something to make the viewer think about the report after it's finished. So you might say, it's certainly clear that, it's certainly clear that solutions are there. If only governments would take more time to implement them. And that's not an opinion, but it's driving the audience's thoughts towards your way of thinking without explicitly giving your opinion. Let's see. Difference between gender. What advice would you give to new journalists and photographers on getting them into media? The most important thing I think is just to get out there on whatever scale. If it could be in your town, it could be a local newspaper, and the getting a sense for a story, whether it has legs, they say, whether it has legs or not. If it has legs, that means that it has an appeal beyond its immediate audience. So you could write a story in somewhere, say you're in Indonesia, and there's a story about Monsanto using their crops, transmutating and causing natural crops to turn into Monsanto crops or something. That's a huge story that you can tell on a very small scale. And if you tell that story well enough and promote it online, there's no reason why a big organization wouldn't take it and use it and credit you. And if you manage to do that, then that's when people start to take notice. Difference between agenda-driven headlines.
There's also a question about any good tips for precise caption selection for a photo taken. It can also be, but also
precise caption. Sorry, say that again. Precise caption selection
for a photo taken.
For a photo taken. You mean, what do you mean selection? Selecting? You mean writing the caption yourself, or I don't understand the question. Sorry.
Question from Osman. Any good tip for precise caption selection for a photo taken? Or maybe Osman can write on chat more precisely what he meant by this question.
I'll give you another. How to write a good caption? Okay. So we went through captions a little bit, and to give you more detail, you can fill in what the photo can't using words. So rather than saying what people can see in the photo, give them a sense of what the photo can't give them, which is sound, for example. So using onomatopoeic words to elicit the sound of the image, to try and instill as much of a sensory experience from that image as possible, usually makes for a good caption. So for example, the crashing, she's talking about the crashing of the waves. You can see it, but you can't hear it. If there's a fragrance, if there's an inherent fragrance, anything other than the visual sense that's coming out of that photo that you can put in a nice punchy short sentence, then that's probably a good piece of advice, I hope. How do you write attention grabbing headlines? That's a good question. So I'm not very good at headlines, I'll be honest. It takes a long time to. I always write a headline at the very end. So I don't know what the headline's going to be until I've written the whole piece, filmed everything, everything's done. The very last thing I'll do is the headline, because it's only when you finished it that you get a sense of what it really is and how to capture it in as few words as possible. Now, you can do online, you can look up SEO, so search engine optimization. And this is kind of taken over headlines. Headlines used to be you write something witty, you write something snappy, and that sells newspapers. Now about how Google will pick up your headline. And these days they always tell us that it used to be a headline had to be short, but now they actually want headlines to be longer. And usually you want a headline to ask a question. So something like, could this be the answer to food security in the Middle East? Question mark. People go, okay, all right, okay, and they want to know the answer. So they teach us to write longer headlines than in the past and to include a question, so that there's some intrigue, so that there's some reason to click on it. But again, you can find out more information about that with, it's called search engine optimization, and it's key to journalist headline writing now.
Maybe we can take a last question and go to Mentimeter's question. And if you have more questions on chat, we will take them, and maybe also in the next webinar about mobile journalism, it's also questions that can also be asked.
Yes, I can include that. That's good. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, for sure.
So maybe I will share my screen and ask you to go to menti.com for a bit of interactive questions. So as you can see here, you can go to www.menti.com, and we will have a few questions for you to participate. So you can join and put this code 451741, and we have 4 small questions for you, for everyone.
Okay. I'll go now and do that. Okay. Thank you very much.
So we'll wait a bit. You can still join at any point this Menti. So we'll go to the first question, especially for wiry students and other wiry teacher maybe. What specific topics, story have you investigated as a wiry, and did you make an article, photo, or video for that? We'll let you 1-2 minutes to answer if you have anything to share, because we also like to hear from you what you've done. And if you can't go to Menti, you can also write on chat and the answers. So about pollution, about environmental improvement in home during COVID-19, which is also really important. Concert and kindergarten website, general pollution, article and COVID-19 video in the making. Good luck for that. Photo shooting. Photo and video about climate change, single-use plastic, reducing plastic waste, photo waste writing. So most of environmental topics are really good. So you were also facing with writing captions. Since time is running, we're going to the other question. What information sources did you use when you were investigating your topic? So you can choose different options. Was it with personal interviews, news agencies such as Reuters, other websites, academic articles and books, your own data and collection, material from your teachers? So it's true that there are lots of ways to investigate, and to have good investigation is also to multiply the sources And I think we're also going to introduce that in the next webinar with James about mobile journalism, about interviews, and how to make good interviews. That can also be really interesting for wiry students. So interview is something that is also really common. Websites and your own data collections, such as survey of observations. Good. Academic articles and books. But the most popular one is personal interview that's also really complicated to make, but maybe we can also introduce that in the next webinar or website. Social medias too is really important. It's true that most of information is also now coming from social medias, but as we also mentioned, verifying your sources and avoiding fake news is also really important. Also as a wiry, to be sure that you have the good information. So yeah, be also careful with social medias. And in one word or sentence, what did you learn from this webinar? So I'll also give you a few minutes. Don't overwrite. Yeah, sure. Caption tips, good. How to make good captions. Is it important to get the proper information from a good source? Yes, it's what we have seen with the video and the speech of James, lots of answers coming at the same time. How one photo could be so informative. Yes, what we have seen at the beginning and different interpretation too. How to keep caption short, how to build story from news. Photo with no words saying more than text. This is the sentence we begin with. Caption tips. Very good. And last question, did you find the webinar useful? So we'll let you, and you can still go and Menti and answer after. Very useful. So I'll stop sharing my screen. So yeah, it's already 4 and times is running really, really fast. So I would like to thank you all and thank you, James, if you're here. I can't see you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Here.
I'd like to thank you very much for this really informative presentation. And I think everyone really appreciates it. And we will be seeing you in 1 week, next week, about mobile journalism.
Yes.
And I think other questions that have been raised are going to be answered about interviews and other things.
Yes, and I will use this now to plan for the next one. So there's one thing I wanted to include that I didn't, which I'll include in the next one. And the fact that you want to do your own interviews is perfect because I've already prepared something to help you with that. So that'll be
perfect. And if you have other questions, please write them also on chat. And if you have any last words, James, for the audience, or if you wanted to add something?
Just thank you very much for listening, and I really hope that anything that I can tell you will have to write a story about the environment with impact that's gonna make a difference.
So thank you very much, and hope to see you all next week for 2 other webinars. One will be on the 5th of May about fostering education and about urban agriculture, and the one with James on 6th of May about mobile journalism. So hope to see you all next week. Thanks.
Yeah, and sign for on our website for that. Thank you.
Yeah.